much point in denying it. When I was a child, I wanted to be Robin Hood. I made myself a little bow and would shoot homemade arrows with taped-on fletchings in my backyard. I had a green felt pointed cap that my mother made me that I absolutely adored. I adored it enough to wear it to school, despite the teasing from the other kids. Repeatedly. In addition to having a mile-wide nerdy streak, I was quite the stubborn child. The years have rolled on, and while I've lost my favorite Robin Hood hat since those days, today's guest keeps his close at hand. When it's not firmly seated on his head, at least. Welcome to the Greenwood, one and all. For our second episode, I decided to interview Ade Andrews, an actor and historian who plays the role of Robin Hood, but who also uses that role as a tool for education and inspiration through his performances and guided tours in and around the city of Nottingham. As a museum professional, I value the role of informal education and frequently consider the various forms of interpretation that can be used for engaging, educating, and inspiring audiences. As such, I was excited for the opportunity to speak with Ade Andrews about his interpretive work as Robin Hood, and what there is to be learned from engaging with a figure that is born from folklore and popular culture. During our talk, we discuss how entertainment can serve an important role in regards to education, how Robin Hood functions as an inspirational figure when confronting the problems of the 21st century, and how starting with this year, 2021, the city of Nottingham has never been a better place to visit for a Robin Hood fan. We also get to one of the philosophical cores of this podcast, that there's no potential historical outlaw from the Middle Ages or any specific portrayal of this character that matters as much as what we can learn about ourselves from engaging with the question of why this is a story we keep returning to. Ade Andrews has been performing as Robin Hood in various capacities since the 90s, and his tours in Nottingham have won numerous awards, including the 2020 Traveler's Choice Award from TripAdvisor and the silver winner for Experience of the Year from Visit England. As such, I was thrilled to join him in the Greenwood for an hour, and I hope that you are too. If one were to travel back in time to Nottingham in the Middle Ages, hoping to see Robin Hood, they would probably be disappointed. There would be no actual figure for them to see that meets the description we have built up in our minds. But if someone were to go to Nottingham today, they could find that figure in the person of my guest today, Ade Andrews, the official outlaw for Nottingham. How are you doing today, Ade?
I'm doing good, thank you.
All right.
Good, can't complain. The sun is starting to shine, so we'll be back on the streets soon.
Yes. So you bring to life the person of Robin Hood through your performances, especially your award-winning tours of Nottingham, sort of these historic tours where you lead people through the city. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about yourself, about your tours, and how you became Robin Hood?
In the current day, as Robin Hood, I've got a few strings to my bow. And as you say, I run various tours of Nottingham, the main one being the Robin Hood Town Tour, which is the main event in Nottingham on a Saturday afternoon. And that's number one on TripAdvisor. And there's a Sherwood Forest tour. And there's also the ballad presentation of Robin Hood and the Monk at St. Mary's Church, which is more of a family show. So I do the tours of the city. I'm also a host for an ambassador for Visit Nottinghamshire, Visit England, and Visit Britain. And so I handle a lot of the press and media that comes to Nottingham to fly the flag of the city on the global stage. I also host a lot of corporate events and university events, international students coming to the city, opening conferences, etc. So really, I'm a one-stop shop for Robin Hood in Nottingham. And I've got my finger in I've got irons and a few fires.
Yeah, sounds like it keeps you quite busy. How'd you get started with all that?
Yeah, how did it come to be? As a kid, like most lads, I was into Robin Hood adventure. I was into history when I was a kid. When I was 16, Highlander came out, the film, in 1986 with Christopher Lambert, and that inspired me to start sword fighting. So when I was 16, 17, I was doing sword fighting with a Viking reenactment group. When I was 18, I went down to London to university to do a degree in history. And when I finished, I came up to Nottingham looking for work on the medieval scene. So I had long hair and a sword, etc. I had knowledge of folklore and history and Robin Hood. When I got to Nottingham, it was like pantomime. So I thought I'll become Robin Hood. So initially, I spent 10 years hosting banquets at the Tales of Robin Hood, which is a big tourist attraction off the back of the Kevin Costner movie. So I was hosting banquets there. But all the time I was researching Robin Hood, researching the city. Then I started doing other events elsewhere and a few charity gigs. And so just building my knowledge, my character as Robin Hood. And then in 2005, after 10 years of banquets, I left the Tales of Robin Hood. I was a ranger in Sherwood Forest. And of course, I was researching the forest and resurrecting old customs like May Day celebrations, getting people involved emotionally and intellectually in the forest. So that was a very green enterprise. And all the time, a green man, you could say. I was researching the forest as well. And then I left that job in 2012 and I jumped into the deep end, used all my knowledge to put a tour together. And the Robin Hood Town Tour was born as a one-stop shop for knowledge on Robin Hood, Sherwood Forest, and the city, and how to have a good time in the city as well. And as I say, it's won a few awards, and here I am.
Fantastic. It sounds like it's been quite a journey. You mentioned doing a lot of research. Are there any particular sources that you found especially informative or useful to you as it's come to building up your body of knowledge and informing your presentation of Robin Hood?
Yes, there's a lot of stuff out there about Robin Hood, and you do have to be careful because a lot of it is might be written with the best intentions, but written for an audience, and it might be a bit whimsical. So you need to go to the good authors like J.C. Holt and people like that. And but the more you research Robin Hood, the more you find these authors. There's a cracking website as well called Bold Outlaw, which is well worth checking out as well. And that's just one man's passionate desire about Robin Hood, pursuing it. Have you seen that? Have you?
I have not been to their website, but I've engaged with them a few times on Twitter. They're very active on social media.
I see. So it's the main sort of authors which I'll go to. But I'm also always reading around the subject as well. But J.C. Holt is, the main author, I'd say.
Robin Hood has a long, complicated history, and delving into works like J.C. Holt's book really brings to light how complicated and varied that history is. Given that the character has such a varied history and has been presented in so many different ways, are there takes or representations of that character that you find especially informative towards your performance? A way that you sort of draw these various disparate elements together? And what are the qualities you try most to emphasize in terms of the personage of Robin Hood?
Well, as you say, I mean, there wasn't one Robin Hood. There was many Robin Hoods. He's a composite hero who's been brought to life in different periods of history. And each of those manifestations of Robin Hood has a slightly different presentation. But at the end of it, he's always a good man fighting the bad guys. In the same way Robin Hood's a composite hero, my character, my presentation is a composite of the different chapters. And so therefore I don't represent any one particular period, but my character, my persona, my costume just reflects the ethos and aesthetics of the legend in general, rather than any specific time frames within that. And of course, at the heart of the Robin Hood legend, no matter what chapter you'd be looking at, apart from the first chapter, from the 12th to the 15th century, when he is more of a bloodthirsty criminal, but essentially he holds the common people close to his heart, and he's seen as a good man. He's a hero amongst the peasants in the early medieval period. He's always a hero as time goes on. He's a symbol of the innate goodness within man. And so therefore it's the ideals of truth, charity, justice, freedom, which I'm a voice piece for to an audience in the modern day. And these are ideals which are very close to my heart. I'm not trying to demonstrate any one particular period, but just a general overview of the character of Robin Hood, and with a positive message for the world in the modern day. Because at the end of the day, Robin Hood is a symbol of hope and freedom. And that is very important in the 21st century.
Yeah, I really like that idea of thinking less about a particular presentation of, oh, we're going to be making sure that we are showing off Robin Hood as a yeoman, or making sure we're showing him off as a dispossessed noble or returned crusader, but instead focusing on that kind of broader message of what the character means, why he matters to people. People haven't been telling stories about Robin Hood for centuries because they really love the idea of a yeoman outlaw. They love the idea of a heroic champion who is embodying acts of charity and goodwill and standing up against tyranny. It is those sort of loftier notions that makes the character appealing to us. And I really like that as an idea of that's the thing that you want to emphasize.
Yes, if you try and represent one particular period, you get bogged down in detail, in costume, in what you're saying, etc. It's not who was Robin Hood, it's what does Robin Hood mean. That's the important thing. And so it's my job to make the character accessible to people. If I can open up their minds to the wider context of Robin Hood in the place of history, they can see the development of the story, and they can see their place in it in the modern day. And it is really at the heart of it about being a good person, looking after those around you and looking after, well, this land, which is our home. It's that message of goodwill that I'm trying to bring to the people of the world in the 21st century through the character of Robin Hood. But also, there's another side to the coin, because what I'm doing is giving them an exciting lesson on the evolution of the legend, but also showing off the city as well. You know, giving them the history of the city and pointing out the best places to go. So when people do come to Nottingham, they can make the most of their time and live like a local. So really my work, it is just to celebrate Robin Hood and Nottingham. And you can't get bogged down in too much fine detail, which the different chapters would require. But I do show how the chapters link together and feed into each other and make the small stories, the ballads, grow into a legend over centuries. And that's where the real magic is. I think that's important, actually. With my synthesis of all periods of history and presenting the general persona of Robin Hood, that's where the magic is. That's where the magic is for me. And that's what people respond to.
As people are coming onto your tour, they're going to see you there as Robin Hood, and they're going to have certain expectations built up in their minds of what they expect to see and get from a Robin Hood figure. How do you help meet those expectations that they have in their minds? And then the follow-up question is, how do you elevate those expectations? What are some of the techniques or talking points that you have that help inform them to wider ideas about the character and his place in history and lore?
Okay, Robin Hood is well known, and a lot of people think that he lived in the reign of King Richard the Lionheart, etc. These are the expectations people are bringing when they come on a tour. There is a Crusader knight in the reign of King Richard the Lionheart. He did rob from the rich to give to the poor. And I've got all these preconceived ideas, and a lot of those are misconceptions. And so what I'm doing through a good presentation of historical fact, which is presented with a storyteller's language, that becomes a good medium to open people's minds as to the truth behind Robin Hood. And once they can see beyond their preconceived ideas, a whole world opens up. And my work becomes a springboard into people's imaginations to find their own version of Robin Hood. And that's an important thing as well. I mean, who was Robin Hood? It's what does he mean to you? That's an important thing. is a hero for you. And this is why that resonates all over the world. Because it's got a universal message, isn't it? A timeless message as well. Good guys fighting the bad guys to make the world a better place. That's beautiful. That's why people believe in him.
Have there been bits of recent history, modern events that people can relate to that you've been able to connect to that story, that idea of good guys versus bad guys and standing up for what's right?
Well, immediately, yes. I do a lot of tours for international groups. And of course, we had kids from France coming over to learn English. And this was over a year ago now. But this is when Gilets jaunes, the yellow vests, were demanding a better standard of living, basically. And these kids, this is their parents who are in the streets, not rioting, just protesting, demonstrating against the austerity of the time. And this caught the kids' imagination because they're able to relate the concept of Robin Hood to what their parents were doing, fighting for, a better life, really. And you could say the story has never changed, couldn't you? As an overview, you could always say that the common man has always been put upon by the man. And it's the common people who put up with our leaders' failure and incompetence and self-interest and greed. We're the ones who pay the price with unemployment, losing our pensions, etc. And so things have got to change. And in between the words of my guided tour and the history lesson, it is a case of, in between the lines, sowing the seeds of dissent about the current status quo and saying, what are we going to do here, guys? You're going to lie down and take it. We're going to stand up and be counted and fight the good fight for a better world. And so there's a really positive message which I'm pushing out to the people. And again, it's about trying to rally that community spirit, which created Robin Hood all those years ago, over the centuries, but in the modern day, as a force for good.
It's an interesting and challenging line of work from my experience. I was for a while working at a museum, and we had an exhibit at this museum that was about exploring this tropical island filled with various clues to search for a treasure. And it had a kind of mystical, otherworldly feel. It also had a little bit of a pulp adventure feel. It was supposedly taking place in 1939. And I had a character who was from that time period. And so it was my job to be interacting with our museum visitors in the person of this character from 1939, but also to impart a lot of very specific information about how to help them on their exploration. And this involved also sometimes giving them advice to use anachronistic tools like, taking photos of the various clues and puzzles that they would find with their phones so they could study them later. And so it was always a very interesting challenge, I found, trying to maintain that sense of illusion and whimsy from embodying a character while also acknowledging that it's all a fantasy, and I can give you bits of information in a way that my character probably wouldn't, because the purpose of you being here is to explore this area. And so I would gather that your Robin Hood tours have a very similar quality. While you're embodying Robin Hood the whole time, the way you actually interact with people has this sort of flexibility where what you get from them and the bits of information you want to convey can all be accomplished without ever having to exactly break character, but not having to adhere strictly to, as we were saying before, pretending that you're actually in the medieval period, because you couldn't very well be talking about the coffee shops and so on if that were the case. I guess I was just kind of wondering if you could talk a little bit about the reactions you get from your visitors to your performances and to your tours.
There is a hell of a lot of things going on when I do this performance. Not only am I Robin Hood, but I'm also a storyteller, a narrator to a story. and I'm an observer of the story, but I'm also a tour guide in the modern day. When you're doing a city tour, you've got trams, lorries, the traffic on the road, you've got every now and then idiots to deal with. You've got to guide people safely around the town. So you need some semblance of normality, don't you, to guide people around for everyone to be safe, especially in these COVID times. But people are with me on this journey as I exercise my imagination. They can straight away tap into what I'm doing. And I'm lucky in that it seems to work. So, straight away, I have a credibility as Robin Hood to take those liberties of stepping in and out of character, then becoming a tour guide, then speaking quickly to a colleague. But my interaction with the locals in town, the audience enjoys that as well. So really, they're just jumping on board for 2.5 hours with me as I exercise my imagination and try different things. And that's a good thing about, as you probably well know, if you're doing a show, unlike an actor, they do a show for, say, rehearse for 6 months and then the show for 2 weeks. But as a storyteller or a tour guide, you're just constantly crafting, aren't you? Mm-hmm. So I'm crafting my knowledge and material and also my presentation of the character. Yeah, I don't know how it works, but it does work. But one thing I will say is that people want to believe. They're disappointed there's little available to do with Robin Hood in Nottingham. And so they see my work and the effort that's gone into it and the level of knowledge and the witticisms that people are just with me straight away. They jump on board for that ride for 2.5 hours. And it is like a roller coaster, or a bit slower, of course. But when they go away, they're loaded with knowledge and also inspiration. So you've tapped into something quite deep in them. But this notion of being a better person and rallying together, a better world where all are equal. People just, get with the spirit of what I'm doing.
Requires a lot of flexibility and improvisation, I would imagine.
It does. And that comes easy with time. If there's any apprentices or novices out there, yes, so stick with it. Because it is a fascinating journey, creating a character, building it over time, fleshing it out, watching it come to life, watching people believe your character. It's intangible, but there's magic there. You can't put your finger on it, but it works.
So you mentioned a moment ago how one of the things that people sometimes find disappointing is a lack of Robin Hood related material in and around Nottingham. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, about Nottingham's history with the character of Robin Hood and how they have or have not lived up to people's expectations and desires as it pertains to this incredibly popular worldwide known figure.
This is a bit of a sorry story, really, because the bottom line is that Nottingham has failed with Robin Hood, because what we have here is a world famous character, which is essentially a global brand, but with no product. And that product is worth billions, and the city has failed. And things are changing now. We'll come to that in a bit. People have preconceived ideas, don't they? So when they come to Nottingham, they're always surprised that it is it's a historic town which grew into an industrial town, one of the first industrial towns in England. And it was scarred by industry. Then in the post-war period as well, with the brutalism of the 1960s architecture, Nottingham really lost its character. So you need someone like me to join all those historical jewels together and paint color into the picture. The people are surprised by the concrete jungle of Nottingham.
Do you find that is mostly American and foreign visitors that are expecting more of a medieval semblance?
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Yeah, Americans in particular, they think that Nottingham is a like Shakespeare town, a small historic town with medieval characters wander around. And they come to this concrete jungle, they are surprised. But once they've seen the historical jewels, and I've linked all the places together with more knowledge and inspiration and witticisms, then they see the bigger picture. It's a massive loss. And how could you not be successful with a world famous character? That is the question. Until now, there's only really been the Robin Hood statue in the city. The castle isn't a castle, because the medieval castle, once one of the greatest castles in the land, was pulled down after the English Civil War. And what we have there is a ducal palace, a palace for the Duke of Newcastle. Still a fascinating building, and there's a reason to go to Nottingham Castle, which I'll come to in a bit. But the other thing, people think that Sherwood Forest is in the city, but it's not. It's 20 miles north of the city. Because what happened was, over the centuries, the forest, which used to be 30 miles north to south by 10 miles east to west, just shrunk and shrunk, and all that's left is 1.25 square miles, which is the ancient heart of the forest at Edwinstowe, 20 miles north of the city. So really, when people come here, they're a bit disappointed because they can't see Robin Hood, the castle isn't a castle, and the forest is miles away.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm able to do is make people understand the status quo, develop to the city, sad story of the decimation of the forest. But once they see these things and the story of Robin Hood is in context, it all makes sense. And that picture, which they get on the tour, it works, and they go away satisfied. And that's proven by the reviews on TripAdvisor. It's got many, many excellent reviews, and it's delivered the goods as far as people are expecting when they come to Nottingham. If I hadn't been here, well, it remains to be seen. well, who knows? Nottingham has failed in the past. One thing I will say is that in the future looks bright, because the RSPB, which has a new visitor centre in Sherwood Forest, they're promising more heritage entertainment. And also Nottingham Castle is opening within a month or two as a world-class attraction after its £30 million regeneration. So the future looks bright for Robin Hood in Nottingham. And maybe through all this work, we'll be able to put Robin Hood on the pedestal he deserves as a figurehead of culture and the environment. And that is the main drive behind my work, to do that. Make sure Robin Hood gets the respect he deserves.
Do you think it would be fair to say that between the visitor center in Sherwood, the Robin Hood Gallery that is opening at the Castle Trust Museum, and your tours, Robin Hood has never been more alive and more present in the Nottingham area than he is or will be soon in the year 2021?
Yes, that's the bottom line. I've dedicated my life to this Robin Hood work. The pantomime scene that was here previously was an embarrassment to this character. It might have been good if you had young families with little kids, but as you well know, there's a more discerning, educated, moneyed, older audience out there, isn't there? Looking for good quality historical information and entertainment. But yes, you're right. I've never really seen it that succinctly before, but with the forest, the castle, and the work I'm doing. But I guess Robin Hood in Nottingham has never had it so good.
Yeah.
That is the truth, yes.
Yeah, this is a character that has been wildly popular for centuries. You know, Sir Walter Scott's Ivanhoe, Robin Hood features prominently in that novel. That was a huge bestseller. We had record-breaking movies going back all the way to 1922, and then up through the Kevin Costner film, and more recent films that have been not perhaps the blockbusters that the filmmakers may have hoped for, but we had the Errol Flynn movie, there was the Richard Green television series, the Michael Praed television series. Robin Hood has been around and in the popular consciousness and bringing Hollywood, and you know, or the BBC or ITV or other, you know, channels and content creators ridiculous sums of money. But despite all that, now is the best time to go to Nottingham and explore Robin Hood.
Yeah, these these films are hit and miss, aren't they? Did you see the Egerton one recently, the latest one?
Yes, I did.
End of story, really, isn't it? You know, but as you correctly said, it has brought Robin Hood to a modern, younger audience. But they're more like superheroes, aren't they?
That was the Robin Hood movie. That's a Batman movie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
If you're a fan of Robin Hood, there's just never been a better time to go to Nottingham than ever before.
Yes,
As soon as the
indeed,
world opens up
indeed.
at least a little more.
Although my work is as Robin Hood is very much born of myself, my abilities. I'm a historian, as an actor, etc., and 25 years of experience of doing this sort of thing now. If I can't really get someone trained up to do what I'm doing, because it'd be too big a job. So if you want to come to Nottingham, make sure it's in the next 10 years before I'm too old for the green tights.
Now, you say green tights, and that is something we associate a lot with Robin Hood. We see it in the Errol Flynn movies, and it was a big, basically the joke in the Mel Brooks movie in the 90s. Do you actually wear green tights while you are performing as Robin Hood?
No, I don't. There's practicalities of the modern day to be observed here, isn't there? You wouldn't wear green tights in Nottingham. It's not very practical, not very warm, and it wouldn't do the character any favors. What I'm doing, my costume really is a Sons of Anarchy.
The television show about bikers?
Yeah. I wear leather trousers. Been wearing them 25 years now. They're all battered and patched up, so they look medieval. I've got medieval boots, a medieval tunic that I made myself. Well, a colleague made for me, but I've made other bits of myself. So all my kit is homemade, and it looks it's practical from rain or shine. I've got the bow, the sword, etc. The hat with a feather. So in the same way, my knowledge has been pieced together over time into this complete story. So too my costume has been pieced together over time into a vision of Robin Hood. And it's not any particular period, as we've discussed. It's a generic Robin Hood that you can expect to see on stage or in film in any different period. So it is the ethos and the aesthetics of how the character appears, but also mixed with the practicality of the modern day. You wouldn't want to live in Sherwood Forest wearing a pair of green tights, would you? I mean, let's face it.
Probably not. Tights in a forest do not actually sound very practical. That is one of the things I find interesting about the character of Robin Hood is that there is basically an iconic look. Like you were just saying, if you were to go into a theater, see a production of Robin Hood, you sort of already have a vision in your mind of what you expect to see. And the character is so adaptable, though. Most of the recent movies don't actually portray that image. The movies feel like they need to distance themselves from the iconic image. And whether the movies are flops like the more recent ones or big hits like the Kevin Costner one, they still don't conquer that iconic image. You have something like the Mel Brooks movie Men in Tights, which is straight up a parody of the Kevin Costner film, but they never tried to make Robin Hood look like Kevin Costner. They go for the iconic look. And so that is something that I find very interesting and enduring about how this character, as you've mentioned before, has a bit of a global brand. There is something just inherently recognizable. And I'm sure that makes it a lot easier for you to be able to embody that character, to figure out how to dress like him and bring people in. If you are trying to dress like Taron Egerton or Russell Crowe or even Kevin Costner, I expect that would be much more challenging to bring in people and have them get on board with the notion that you are being Robin Hood. Do you feel that's accurate?
You're right. There is a stereotypical image of Robin Hood. Really, it comes from the storybooks, which were inspired by Ivanhoe in 1819. And those storybook characters stepped out of the pages of storybooks onto stages of theatres and into film. And yeah, there is it's the wrong word to use, but a uniform for Robin Hood. But also, since I've got long hair, I've got my sort of goatee, beard, etc., and I'm the right height and stature, really, you'd expect. So I'm instantly recognisable as Robin Hood, the way I look facially and with my kit. So straight away, the spell is cast. So even if I'm speaking to them in character as Robin, or as a tour guide welcoming them on the tour, I am Robin Hood. There's no two ways about it. It's more difficult to get the character across if you've got short hair or blonde hair and a ponytail and you're clean shaven. It wouldn't really work with it.
Yeah, you need to look a
So
little roguish, right?
yeah, I am a sort of alternative, rocker, biker type on the fringes of society. And that's exactly what Robin Hood would have been as well, isn't it? So it's the outlaw spirit is manifest in myself and in my work.
Hmm.
When the Michael Praed series was on, I would have been 12 or 13 then. I thought one day I'm going to be Robin Hood. And here I am as an adult still dressing up.
I admire that so much. We're told all the time when you're a kid, what is your dream job? And for you, it was becoming Robin Hood, and you did that. And I feel I
Yeah,
might have felt the exact same way as a kid, but I didn't go on and become Robin Hood like you did. So my kudos to you for that.
no, well, it's an interesting thing, this conversation. Yeah, it's the playful nature of what I'm doing. People want to believe in Robin Hood. And the problem with becoming an adult is you get old and you leave your childhood and the imagination behind, don't you? Because you've got to be live in the rational world and all the hassle. So I guess I'm inviting people to regress with me, not only back into time, but into childhood fantasies with the playful nature of my presentation. And that's why there's lots of things going on which different people with different levels of ability, different interests can grab hold of. And it all adds up to a good experience for a wide range of people. So maybe I was born to be Robin Hood and that's why it's working.
One of the questions I wanted to ask was what you considered the value of discussing legendary figures in an informal education setting. And I think you really just hit on it right there. Is that when you're bringing in a legendary figure as opposed to a historical one, you can really capture people's hearts because there's, as you said, so many of us have imagined Robin Hood, thought about him, perhaps wanted to be him when we were kids. And so, do you have anything else to add to that idea of using a legendary figure in an informal education setting to help bring people in?
Yes, because he's a composite, timeless hero, he's not tied down to nitty gritty plethora of details. People do have their own idea and their own imagination. And so once I'm there, I'm the catalyst I'm a catalyst to open people's minds as to the possibilities of Robin Hood. And that's put into the context of the evolution of the legend, the context of the city. And so I do say one phrase which I use is education through fascination. And really, that's what's going on with the work I'm doing as Robin Hood. I'm very lucky that he is a flexible character and that people do know him in their own imaginations. So all I'm doing is giving them more things to think about in their own imaginations. So I'm empowering them on their quest for their own personal Robin Hood.
I can't express enough how much I love that phrase, education through fascination. When I was working in museums, that was so much the heart of what we were trying to do. The idea of finding the wow moments, the hooks to help bring people in, to entertain them. Edutainment was a phrase that got thrown around a lot, where you're entertaining people and that's how you're holding their attention, but there is real knowledge that you're trying to impart at the same time. Along those lines, you mentioned various gems about Nottingham that you like to point out. So I was just kind of wondering what a few of those might be. What are some of the highlights of your tour that you especially enjoy bringing people to or discussing?
Is this in particular to Robin Hood in general or Nottingham in general, or both?
Both or either.
With regards to Robin Hood, I really do love opening people's minds to the fact that he's not a Crusader knight in the reign of King Richard Lionheart. He is a composite hero, and he's a reflection of people just like you rallying together in the medieval period. And so when you see the light bulb come on, understanding, that's just that's great for me to have gone away with knowledge about this character. But with regards to the physical aspects of the city, you've got the beautiful ancient St. Mary's Church, and that's an important site because the ballad of Robin Hood and the monk was set at St. Mary's Church. And that was first written down around 1450, but it's at least a few hundred years older than that. But that's a beautiful church, and I deliver part of the original ballad. to the audience in the grounds of the church where it actually happened. So that's a remarkable place. It's a very scenic place. Just down the road from the St. Mary's Church, you've got the old county jail. And legend tells us that's the very oubliette or cell that Robin Hood was thrown into when he was arrested at St. Mary's Church. This is now the National Justice Museum. All these places are on the tour, of course. The Lace Market area is fascinating. The evolution of the city there from a picturesque garden town, and 50 years later, one of the biggest slums in the British Empire. That was the advent of the lace industry. And of course, the castle, Nottingham Castle, even though it doesn't look like a castle, people think it looks a bit, very boring. It does have one of the most fascinating stories of any castle in this country. So giving them a timeline of the evolution of the castle, fascinating as well. And that's particularly exciting because that timeline I give them is leading up to the castle opening in a few months' time as a world-class attraction. And of course, the tour finishes at the trip to Jerusalem, which is the oldest pub in England. And that's set into sandstone caves, which are beneath the great rock on which the castle stands. And that is, if you come to Nottingham, that's one of the main places to go, the trip to Jerusalem. 1189, which of course you recognize as a date that King Richard Lionheart set off in the Third Crusade. But the ales there are great, the atmosphere is great in springtime and summertime, and that's where we finish the Robin Hood town tour. So really, what more could a tourist want? Meet Robin Hood, go on a fantastic tour of the city, learn about the city, learn about Robin Hood, see the best places to go, and finish in the sun at the oldest pub in England. And that's a good afternoon out, isn't it?
It sounds fantastic. I hope to be able to do it someday soon myself. Maybe after that castle opens. Speaking of that castle opening, and we hit on earlier how when it reopens, there will be this Robin Hood gallery. It's my understanding that they did not initially plan on including anything Robin Hood related, but in the process of changing their mind and including this Robin Hood gallery, it was worked into the notion of a history of revolutions that have occurred in the Nottingham area, and the idea of that spirit of a revolutionary, and Robin Hood is more an embodiment of that spirit than a historical figure. Would that seem right to the understanding that you have of what's going on there? And do you work any of that into your tours?
That is correct. Initially, when a funding bid went into the Heritage Lottery, they said we're not going to fund anyone who never existed. And that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because he never existed, but he's a symbol of the spirit of the common people. He's got a message for the world today, and it's a global brand worth billions. So the second plan of attack was to put Robin Hood into the context of the story of Nottingham, with the descent and rebellion over the ages, from the medieval period and through the darkness of the industrial age, when hundreds are dying every day. And so Robin Hood is now a small part of the bigger story of Nottingham. And that's when the funding was granted. And this is very much an exciting time for Nottingham. This is a new chapter opening in the story of Nottingham and Nottingham Castle. And hopefully the castle should be the crowning glory of Nottingham's Renaissance. And hopefully Robin Hood himself will benefit from this holistic work that's going on.
Yeah, I certainly hope that as the world opens up a little bit, lockdown restrictions ease, it becomes safer to travel around, that will coincide so nicely with the castle's reopening, that people will be so thirsty to travel, to get to see new places, and then to have this brand new, as you said, world-class attraction. I've previewed some of the galleries there online, spoken to some of the workers there, and it really sounds like it's going to be a magnificent museum. And I'm really hoping that Nottingham benefits from this burst of tourism in the near future.
Yes, Nottingham, as I said earlier, it is going through a renaissance. £2 billion has been spent in the city centre over the next few years. The castle should be the crowning glory of all this. Nottingham has always been the underdog as a city in England. Tourists, they'll go to London or Bath, maybe, Stratford, Shakespeare Town. But now, as a result of the Robin Hood Town Tour and the castle opening, people have been driven up north. And so there's no reason why, with this renaissance, that Nottingham shouldn't be in a few years a major European city. European, if I can use that word.
Yeah, I don't know if you're allowed to after Brexit.
Well, I voted to stay, actually, mate. So let's cut to the quick, okay? Bridge is the way forward, not boundaries.
I agree. I mean, I have no say in it since I'm not British. Speaking of bridges and not boundaries, though, and the idea of the modern day and the 21st century, you've talked a little bit about being the Robin Hood of the 21st century. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more about what that means to you and how you tie things like environmental activism into this.
I was the Heritage Ranger for the Sherwood Forest Trust from 2005 to 2012, before I got the town tour off the ground. And the story of Sherwood Forest is incredible. It's a very sad one as well, because that area of 1.25 square miles is still one of the best places in the world for ancient oak trees. And as you're aware, the older a habitat, the more species associated with it. So what's left of Sherwood Forest is our version of tropical rainforest, as rare and as dangerous as tropical rainforest. The problems with the world today: environmental degeneration on a world scale, global warming. This land is our home. Its future's in our hands. Robin Hood is a symbol of the innate goodness within man, but also he's the guardian of the forest, the king of the forest, wasn't he? And so it's very important for me to, in my work, I guess there's two main points. One's about citizenship, being a good person, and the other one is this environmental message. And how do I put this into action, this environmental message? Well, I used to resurrect customs like May Day celebrations and harvest fairs with community groups in the Sherwood Forest area. And those are with ex-mining communities. And the mines shut in the 80s with a miners' strike, yes? And so what I'm doing there is rallying the community spirit of those ex-mining communities behind the community spirit of St. George, as it were, with these local celebrations. And so my main project at the moment is Sherwood People's Forest. And that's rallying the people as Robin Hood to help us plant a spiral of oak trees from the city of Nottingham to Sherwood Forest and to green the grey, to restore the land. Yeah, so nature will survive and wildlife will thrive. At the end of the day, that's one thing we can all agree on. Whether you believe in climate change or not, there's overpopulation, there's limited resources, and we can't carry on like this. There's home truths in storytelling, isn't there? And that's why these stories last, these home truths. Wisdom was passed down over time. So in the same way that new parts have been added to the legend over centuries, I'm just picking up those threads in the modern day, in the 21st century, of citizenship and green living. Because as a presenter of a folklore character, I do have an important job to do, and that is to educate and inspire a better world. That's what I'm trying to do at Robin Hood, as well as celebrate Nottingham and have a good time there as well, of course.
If someone wanted to learn more about the Sherwood Forest People's Project, is that, did I get that name right?
Yeah, Sherwood People's Forest. They can look on my website, which is ezekielbone.com, or there'll be updates on my Facebook page at Ezekiel Bone, and people can get involved there. There's a big blog on my website, which gives the history of Sherwood Forest in a nutshell, why it's so important, and what we're doing today. I'm trying to use the global recognition of Robin Hood and the voice of Robin Hood in the modern day to regenerate Sherwood Forest. So that's my lofty ideals there.
I'll make sure to include a link to your website in the show description.
Thank you.
Would you mind telling our listeners who Ezekiel Bone is and why that's the name of your website?
Ezekiel Bone is my stage name, but also my brand name as well. In the early days, 25 years ago, when I came to Nottingham, I was researching the history of Robin Hood, discovered more about the city. And I realized that Robin Hood was not flexible enough to tell other stories of Nottingham's past. And so Ezekiel Bone was born. The name popped into my mind. In the Bible, Ezekiel he's a prophet, and he takes a handful of dirt and casts it down onto the ground. It takes human form, it takes human shape. Then God breathes life into it. What I'm doing as Ezekiel Bone is, there's a song, isn't it? Them bones, dry bones, knee bones connected to the thigh bone. What I'm doing as Ezekiel Bone is taking the dry bones of history, creating a skeleton of historical fact, which I then flesh out my words and performance to bring history to life for people. So that's why I am Ezekiel Bone. And Ezekiel Bone plays Robin Hood and all the other characters I play.
I like that origin of the name quite a lot. It's very, very thought-provoking.
Right. It is, isn't it? I like it too. It has resonance, doesn't it?
It does.
And it's timeless. You can't really place it. There's a magic to it.
I wanted to ask all of my guests before they go if they had a favorite pop culture representation of Robin Hood. If they were going to go to their DVD player, VCR, Netflix, whatever device they have, pop in some Robin Hood and sit back, relax, and lose themselves in Sherwood Forest for a little while, what would it be for you?
Is it only a choice of one, or we have a top three?
Let's go for a top three. I mean, as somebody who is themselves, in a way, a representation of Robin Hood, I would expect you to have a little bit more of a history and association with these.
In no particular order. If you haven't seen the Errol Flynn movie from 1938, most people have seen it, but if you haven't, check it out. Glorious Technicolor. It's ridiculous, but it's such a joyous celebration of English history seen through the eyes of Americans. It is bonkers. There's not many men who can be macho running around the forest with hands on hips wearing green tights. But Errol Flynn does it. I mean, what a guy. It's just of its time, and it's the ultimate realization of the storybook Robin Hood in film.
Yeah.
Magical. Particular favorite of mine is the Michael Praed series, the BBC series in the 1980s. And that's a perfect example of Robin Hood being reinvented for a particular point in time. This was the New Age in the 1980s, and this Robin Hood series with Michael Praed is imbued with more magic and witchcraft, as befits the New Age. A little known or lesser known film would be the Patrick Bergin Robin Hood film, which came out at the same time as the Kevin Costner one. It was overshadowed by the Kevin Costner one, being a lower budget film. But it's well worth checking out because this was shot in Cheshire at a medieval castle, which was built in Victorian times. It is shot in winter, deepest midwinter with the ice and snow and sleet around you. It was just a grim medieval winter when they were filming it. And so the reality of that, it really conjures up the misery of the medieval period under the Norman yoke. So Patrick Bergin, check it out. Michael Praed, and number one, it's got to be Errol Flynn.
I think those are three excellent recommendations. You have a personal connection to the Patrick Bergin film, don't you?
Yeah, I was an extra in that. Yes, in 92, was it? 91, 92? Yes. Which is why I know it is a medieval winter, because I was working down there. But it was remarkable because if you see a castle in a film nowadays, in a medieval film, it's normally a bit of a ruined castle. This is actually built of red sandstone in the mid-Victorian age to specifications of a medieval castle. So essentially you had a new medieval castle as it would have been in Robin Hood's day. And in the winter, the smell of the wood smoke, darkness falling, the cold, the misery, it was like being a Saxon peasant. Yeah, no acting needed there.
Sounds fun in some ways, challenging in some others.
Yeah, the memories tend to be better in those circumstances, don't they?
Yeah, probably a lot more fun to look back on than to experience.
But that's it.
I mean, I suppose I could really say that a lot about the Middle Ages in general. A lot more fun to look back on than they would have been to actually be in.
Brutal times, weren't they? War, pestilence, famine, death. getting injured on the battlefield. How horrific. People, digging metal iron heads out of your arm or your chest or your leg, limbs getting hacked off, just getting forest laws, hanged, blinded, castrated, crippled, disemboweled. Wow. No wonder the people needed a hero.
Yeah, but we love to romanticize it, though. I worked for a few years doing medieval fairs here in the States, where we would do shows based on Robin Hood, shows based on King Arthur, and those Middle Ages that we've presented are full of fantasy and whimsy, and everybody can be either a daring outlaw or a noble knight, and you have your turkey legs and gypsies dancing around, and it's all just a great big fun party out in the woods.
This is the American version of medieval history, isn't it? And this is fair enough, but you do have the historical characters, and you've got your Gandalfs and your orcs as well, I presume, your wizards, general fairies and princesses. So it is a fantastical mix-up of history and weird and wonderful characters. But that in itself is beautiful. So it brings people together. It's a celebration, human life, imagination. It's entertaining, social cohesion, good times, and opens kids' minds to other possibilities. And that is beautiful, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. And they're always having a good time, and there's still value in these things, even if they are anachronistic, even if they are ahistorical. You can still open up your mind, as you were saying. You can still take in things. Hopefully, you won't take in the notion that this is actual history, but you can still take in something like the story of Robin Hood. You can learn some of the values and lessons from it. There will often be some booths that are present, perhaps not the most popular ones, but they're there, from the Society for Creative Anachronisms, from some person that indulges in heraldry or family histories. And there will be real things that people can learn. Often there will be people who have rediscovered ancient like blacksmithing arts, and they will be there doing live shows and presentations of their craft. So there will be actual things, but if you had stripped away all of the fairies, all of the Gandalfs and the orcs and colorful costumes and turkey legs, people might not show up just to see a blacksmith working in the forest and one guy who wants to talk to you about heraldry.
You're right. And we touched on this before. What I'm doing is using Robin as a hook to draw people in. But I'm saying, yes, what about this and that and this and that and this and that? All here in one city. What a story. What a city.
Well, any final thoughts about interpretive work, about your tour? Anything else you want to leave us with?
For 25 years of my life, pursuing Robin Hood through research and fulfilling the character has been an incredible journey. History is such, as you're aware, my friend, being a historian yourself and working museums, what a subject. I tell kids, if you're interested in history, you'll never be bored in your life. There's always an adventure to go on, isn't there? I'm an educator trying to inspire people. I am getting too old for the green tights now after 25 years, but in my twilight years, I can step into Ezekial Bone. I'll carry on doing Robin Hood, but Ezekial Bone will be my main focus in my work, and I'll see what adventure that Ezekial Bone will be taking me on. And so that remains to be seen. So keep your eyes on my work, ezekielbone.com, and we'll see where I am in the future.
When you feel it's finally time for you to retire as Robin Hood, will you fire an arrow out of a window and then bury your costume where the arrow lands?
Well, on top of the wardrobe. So the Billy Connolly joke goes, doesn't it? Yes. It'll be a sad day when I've got to hang up the green tights, I can tell you. But it's been such a big part of my life. And I guess that's why I've been rewarded with a certain amount of success, because I have dedicated myself to this. But it will be a sad day. Maybe I'll be wearing green tights when I'm 90. Who knows? Let's just see what happens, shall we?
I mean, I like the idea of Robin Hood continuing on well into the future.
Yeah. In an ideal world, I'll have an apprentice or an understudy who can start training up over the next few years to take on the mantle of what I've done, of what I've been doing. And I've got a little John, I've got a Maid Marian, I've got a Friar Tuck as well, who I can bring together for bigger shows elsewhere. But I could do with an understudy as Robin Hood who could carry on this work. Or maybe it's just a case of my work is just a note in the history of the evolution of the legend of Robin Hood.
Well, I mean, I think it's
See,
great work that you've been doing. I think it's very valuable. I think that the city of Nottingham is very fortunate to have had you around and to help give people the Robin Hood experience that they've been really missing and longing for in that area.
thank you for your kind words. I'm a lucky man. I had a dream and I pursued it and I made it work. And the service is good for the world, isn't it? People do need to hear about citizenship, about green living in an entertaining way. They're more likely to take it on board then, aren't they? If they've been inspired and elevated by a thoughtful, entertaining presentation.
And if somebody wants to attend one of your tours, the best place is to go to ezekielbone.com and find information there.
Yes, ezekielbone.com, got Facebook as well. And of course, for the wider Nottinghamshire area, at Visit Nottinghamshire.
All right, fantastic. It's been wonderful talking with you.
And yourself, my friend, and carry on with the good work yourself.
Thank you. I will. Encouraging people into the Greenwood in all sorts of ways.
Watch out for the sheriff.
My thanks again to Ade Andrews for taking the time to meet with me over the Atlantic Ocean via Zoom. Our conversation kept going for a few extra minutes, and during that time we discussed a possible future for the Sheriff of Nottingham in relation to the city tours, some of the challenges that arise from adapting a violent medieval ballad into a family-friendly show for modern audiences, and a slightly controversial unveiling of Nottingham's famous Robin Hood statue in 1952. You can hear that part of the conversation, as well as get access to other perks, by supporting the podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/intogreenwood. If you'd like to learn more about the Robin Hood Nottingham Town Tours and the other Ezekiel Bone projects, or the Sherwood People's Forest Project, make sure you visit ezekielbone.com. I'll include a link in the episode description, as well as a link to boldoutlaw.com, a fantastic website for Robin Hood-related resources that was mentioned in the episode. If you've got questions or comments from me, you can reach me at intogreenwood@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all with the handle @IntoGreenwood. Into the Greenwood is produced and edited by me, Thaddeus Papke. Our theme music is by Plastic 3, and the show is made possible by the support of our listeners. For this episode, I have a special thank you to Seth Button, Jeff Massey, Theo Papke, and Emily Rich for becoming our most recent backers on Patreon. I can't say it enough how much your support means and how crucial it is to help pay web hosting fees, acquire research material and books for the Sherwood Forest Book Club that can be seen on our YouTube channel. I'll also be looking into purchasing better recording equipment. But I decided that the first Patreon goal should be something more inspired by the deeds of a certain legendary figure. Once the first goal is reached, 10% of all funds raised by Into the Greenwood will go to Trees, Water, and People, a 4-star rated charity on Charity Navigator with an international effort promoting conservation and humanitarian work. To learn more and help out, you can become a supporter for as little as $1 per episode on patreon.com/intogreenwood. For a little more, you'll also get access to bonus content and other rewards. If you can't help out financially, I certainly understand, but sharing this podcast with whatever friends, neighbors, dire enemies, casual acquaintances, and roguish outlaws happen to be in your life will also be an immense help. Thank you for spending another hour in the Greenwood, my friends.